This is one of my favorite subjects, helping to understand how the brain works, how it interacts, and how we can interact with each other's brains in a way that either enhances our ability to think or can actually diminish it if that's something that we're looking to do. Most of the information that I have in here comes from a book called Your Brain at Work by David Rock. It's a really, really brilliant book, incredibly well written. And he basically uses an analogy. He talks about the human brain as being a theater. The stage is the prefrontal cortex, the part of the conscious mind, and the rest of the brain, the subconscious mind, is the rest of the theater. And just a really good way to understand how we think and how inadvertently we can interfere with our thinking patterns. Fundamentally, we are problem-solving machines. We humans are problem-solving machines, and neuroscience even has identified which parts of the brain are come alive or are lit up when we are having ideas, when we're having innovations, when we're having insights, when we're problem-solving, and so on. And they've discovered that around 40% of solutions come from the conscious mind, come from the act of thinking, whereas 60% of our insights and our solutions come from the subconscious mind. We've all experienced that when we focus on something for a long time and then we go for a walk or we're having a shower or whatever, that's when these ideas appear. So if we know that we humans are problem-solving machines, then it stands to reason that the solutions that we're looking for could be absolutely anywhere in the organization. And what we do as colleagues, as team members, and as leaders is make sure that we're creating the right environment to capture those ideas so that they can be used to greatest effect by the whole organization. One thing that we do, although we are problem-solving machines, we have a part of the brain which very easily gets interfered with. It's the limbic system, and our emotions are very easily aroused. There's the amygdala right in the middle there. It's known as the threat radar, and some of you may have read about the lizard brain, the chimp brain, or the red brain. All of those are talking about the same thing, pretty much. And basically what happens is that the way we treat each other impacts how the brain is reacting and what happens. As I understand it, obviously we have this as part of our evolution. So it's a part of the brain which protects us. And if we were out walking in the forest and we see something that looks like a snake, we will start moving immediately before our conscious mind can actually rationalize that actually that wasn't a snake, that was a snake, that was a stick, or maybe a vine or something else. So this is part of our brain. So we can't actually stop that from happening. But there are things that we can do to help us with that. The whole area of psychological safety is important. And just recently, in February of this year, 2022, Harvard Business Review published this article, Agile Doesn't Work Without Psychological Safety. And it talks there, high psychological safety elicits a performance response with innovation as the goal, whereas low psychological safety elicits a fear response with survival as the goal. And which one would we rather have in our teams? And this was a really interesting sentence here, which really probably helps us understand whether our teams are agile or not. Maybe something that we can incorporate into an assessment somewhere about agility, into a maturity assessment. But it says when team members stop asking questions, they stop admitting their mistakes, they stop exploring ideas, and they stop challenging the status quo, then they stop being agile. So there is this beautiful connection between agility, psychology, and of course, leadership. So what happens when we experience an emotional hijacking or an amygdala hijack? Well, all the things that we have been hired to do in our organizations, we stop doing. We can't focus, we can't remember, we can't learn, and we can't innovate either. And what is interesting is, although it's not life-threatening, the things that are happening that cause the amygdala to be hijacked, what we've discovered, or what David Rock talks about in his book, is the fact that there are 5 key amygdala triggers that appear in the workplace, and you can see them there. We find that if we're not treating each other properly, we are firing up the amygdala and causing us to be in a state, in a heightened state of fight, flight, or freeze. So what can we do about this? Well, there are a couple of things that we can do. The first one is to learn to lead our own brains, or learn to control our own brains. Now, that is actually quite a difficult thing to do. It's normally easier to do that with somebody else. But if we don't have that luxury, we can actually try and control our own brain. And what we find, what we know, is that the left prefrontal cortex is a part of the brain that actually inhibits those amygdala-driven impulses. So as well as having the amygdala there, we have this ability. And we know that this is the case as we observe friends and colleagues and family around us. Some have what we might call a short fuse, which means that they react very strongly to those impulses, whereas others seem to be able to be calmer and be more level-headed around that. And we actually now know that there's a part of the brain that is actually helping with that. It's a part of the brain that is active when we're in a positive state, when we have a state of enthusiasm, energy, engagement, and so on. But so is it something that we can actually strengthen? Well, as it happens, it is. We can actually strengthen this by following some of those practices that are, of course, are now becoming very common and very widespread. So taking time out of the day, sometimes even a moment, sometimes even a few seconds of just reflection of thought will give us that. Sometimes we call that mindfulness. There are sort of various techniques around mindfulness, but also this this ability to learn to focus on the positive things after we've had that emotional hijack and things have settled down. Maybe take time to go back and try and look for some positives that could have come out of that, but also to spend time in a positive state will help strengthen that part of the brain, which will give us a better chance of dealing with the hijacks. You're not going to be perfect. It's not going to happen all the time. No one is. There will always be something that gets through, but at least this gives us that ability to, more often than not, be in control of our own brains. So that's one thing we can do: learn to control our own brains, learn to lead our own brains. The second thing is to learn how to use other people's brains, and you do this by helping other people to think. There are a couple of ways that we can do that. One is to help other people have insights, and we do that through encouragement and also by reducing primary threats, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So that's something that we can do. And the way we can do that is by forming thinking partnerships. Ideally, we want to get into a room with about between 5 and 7 people if we want to brainstorm ideas and do things, but sometimes that's not possible. We can only have a conversation with one other person. If we have a choice, if we have the opportunity, pick somebody who has no information about the subject matter that we are trying to find a solution for. And the act of the process of collaborating with that person and explaining to that person what it is what the challenge is and what the problem is, so that you can get to a solution, will often lead to a very, very fast solution, because things will be happening in your brain and in the other person's brain that will help you find a solution quickly. There'll be fresh perspectives in both brains that help you find that. So something that we can do there then to help each other to think, and we'll talk more about collaboration in just a second. So what David Rock talks about, he created this this model called SCARF: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And what he explains is that these are primary needs of the brain, as important to our brains as food and water and sleep are to our bodies. And if we are not experiencing those, then we're more likely to be hijacked. We're more likely to be in a state where we're not at our bests. And if we link those two items, if we link the brain needs to those 5 workplace amygdala triggers, there's almost a one-to-one matching. So those there are the brain needs, and then the amygdala triggers. And as you can see there, almost a direct link between. So there's something that we can do to help reduce this. Most of us are very, very good at spotting when someone's state changes. And when that happens, it's important to be able to help that person, bring that person back in the room, if you will. Because whilst they're in a state of hijack, as we say, they're not remembering, they're not focusing, they're not unable to innovate, and they're not able to contribute. So we need to help do that. Some of the ideas as to how we can do that listed here, and I'm sure that you can think of many more. But it's worth taking time to discuss this in your teams, talk about how these things happen and why. Most of the times, by the way, I believe that we trigger each other inadvertently. We don't mean to do it. It's not something that we set out to do. But if we understand that that is what happens, we can then help each other move so much better and get into a place where we can where we can solve problems, we can innovate, we can create, we can do all those things. And just coming back to that collaboration point, when we collaborate, we are, in terms of SCARF, we're really focusing on fairness. We create a sense of fairness. And when we feel a sense of fairness, we release various chemicals in our brain. They are part of the happiness chemicals. Then I'll put a link below where you can read more about that if you'd like to. But what is interesting is that this is what happens with our brains. We become more open to new ideas. We have a higher willingness to connect. And we create a towards emotional state. All the things that we want in order to be able to function better and be more productive. And I've mentioned this one before, but it's worth coming back to because for me, it's just such an important graphic and a piece of information. Harvard Business Review, again, the link will be below. But we spend so much time and energy purchasing and then protecting our hardware. We make sure it's oiled, we make sure it's dust free, we make sure we can get the most out of it. We do the same with our software. We make sure it's bug free, it's protected from attacks and so on. And then we spend all this money on people where we spend a great amount of time and energy hiring the right people, then putting them through training and so on. But we inadvertently, as we've just seen, we can inadvertently cause their brains to shut down and not function the way we want them to. What this article talks about is that when we turn up to work, when we turn up to a project, when we turn up to anything, we have time, we give our time, we have talent, and we have energy. Now, time and talent are reasonably fixed, but energy, as this article has discovered, means that our productivity can really, really multiply up. So they look at a satisfied colleague compared to an engaged one compared to an inspired one. And an engaged colleague is 45% more productive than a satisfied one, and an inspired colleague is up to 125% more productive. So if we invest our time and energy in creating the right psychologically safe environment for our teams, the results are likely to be absolutely extraordinary. Combine this with what we know about Agile and in terms of the impact that Agile has, the Agile ways of working have, combining that with this understanding of how the brain is working really makes us realize what it is that we can achieve and how to achieve it in a very short period of time. Most of this is not complicated, it's not difficult. Thankfully, all the scientists that have gone before have helped explain this. They continue to discover new things. I just love the fact that this information is so very accessible and that we can act on it to make everything better.